see you. It's never been, Jonathan and I were just saying, it's never been easier to get a cold Diet Coke in there. It's fantastic. Yeah? It's terrific. Just wanted to make a comment on the situation in Labrador. Happy Valley Goose Bay is my hometown, so I've been following this very closely. I spoke with the Premier earlier today, and of course, whatever assistance they need from us, they will get. We'll be working with them, and he will be speaking with Minister Sajjan very soon, if not at the moment. There are 6 fires, but fortunately they're on the other side of the river from the generating stations. The community has been evacuated. The entire community. They've gone through the community to make sure everybody has evacuated. But you know, obviously our hearts are with people. This is for anybody who's grown up in the north or has gone through something like this, it is an awful experience to abandon your home, to leave your home, and to not know what may come of it. So we are thinking of everybody right now in Churchill Falls. And I know that the people of my hometown, Happy Valley Goose Bay, I know that they will look after them and take good care of them. They know what it's like to have to go through something like this. We can only hope that all their homes remain intact and that this recovers quickly. To the matter at hand, last year I was given the illustrious title of Chair of the new Ministerial Working Group on Regulatory Efficiency for Clean Growth Projects. We attempted many times to find an acronym for it and couldn't find one. It is a riveting title, but riveting title aside, this has been and is a very important group with some of our most senior ministers on it, including the Finance Minister. And its purpose is to cut red tape, to cut duplication, and to maintain environmental integrity so that we take advantage of some historic energy investment opportunities that are before us, so we can get stuff built faster. We need to build more mines, we need to build more dams, we need to build more nuclear, we need to build more solar, we need to build more wind farms. Pour qu'on puisse construire plus rapidement, on doit construire plus de mines, plus de barrages, avoir plus de nucléaire, plus de solaire, plus de parcs éoliens. So we listened, we took feedback, we worked across government departments to turn that feedback into an action plan, and today we are announcing a number of concrete steps to get projects built faster. 1, a new Clean Growth Office out of PCO to provide coordination as a project makes its way through to completion. 2, a new online federal permitting dashboard so proponents know exactly where their project stands on a timeline. 3, clear service standards. It should take no longer than 2 years for permits and 5 years if a federal assessment is required. 4, more nuclear, more nuclear, more nuclear. 5, a Crown consultation coordinator to make sure that meaningful consultation with Indigenous peoples takes place. 6, we will be working specifically with Northern Premiers, Indigenous governments, and industry to make regulations more efficient for north of 60, where the assessment process and permitting processes are often quite different. Earlier this month, I was back at a conference that I attend every year, Energy NL's conference back in Newfoundland and Labrador. They do an annual conference. Jonathan's been there. And it gathers proponents and investors and energy leaders and workers and experts, and I think for the first time this year, significant Indigenous proponents. And they talk about energy. And the organization's name used to be called the Newfoundland Labrador Oil Industries, Offshore Industries Association. It's now called Energy NL for a reason. Half the attendees this year were renewables. Half. And they had their biggest AGM ever. The place was absolutely booming. And for somebody who has spoken to them about a changing environmental or changing energy landscape and did not always get a warm response, I got to tell you, it felt very good this time round, because It's happening. This change is happening. The optimism now is off the charts. There are unbelievable opportunities in hydrogen and oil and gas, in wind. And I say oil and gas because we've managed to find significant ways to lower emissions and find sources of some of the lowest emitting oil in the world. But the focus now has moved to renewables and to hydrogen. And suddenly my province is on the cusp of becoming a green hydrogen mecca. I could tell you when I worked at NRCan that is not something I saw coming, but who am I to stand in the way of billions of dollars of investment? Because markets are moving. The race is on to build some big projects and secure our energy future, the race to get hydrogen to export and cash in on the profits, the race to cut emissions and build up renewables, the race to secure jobs before they go to other countries. We are all in. Companies are going all in. Workers are more than ready to seize the opportunities in front of them. On est tous impliqués dans cet effort. Les entreprises et les travailleurs sont prêts et prendre en charge les opportunités de l'avenir. So, thank you for your time. Jonathan, to my left, there you are.
Thank you, Seamus. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. I do want to begin by acknowledging this event is taking place on the ancestral lands of the Algonquin people. And certainly I do want to acknowledge the work of my colleagues on the working group and certainly the leadership of Seamus, who led the working group over the past number of months. We talk a lot about climate change these days for obvious reasons. Climate change is altering the world's natural environment in a myriad of harmful ways. At the same time, though, climate change is also rapidly transforming the global economy and global finance in ways that are creating enormous economic opportunities for those who approach the transition to a low-carbon future in a thoughtful, determined, and focused manner. The global energy transition is indeed both an environmental imperative to protect the planet, but it is also an economic opportunity on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. For Canada to seize the extraordinary opportunities that are created by this transition, we must first accept the scientific reality of climate change and ensure that this informs and shapes Canada's economic strategy. The economic strategy that we have collectively developed in partnership with industry, labour, Indigenous peoples, and provinces and territories includes looking to seize those specific economic opportunities in new and accelerating sectors such as critical minerals and critical minerals processing, battery manufacturing, biofuels, net zero petrochemical facilities like the recent $12 billion investment by Dow in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, nuclear technology, carbon capture and negative emissions technologies, and hydrogen production, utilization, and export. And certainly, to seize such opportunities in a timely manner must involve regulatory and permitting reform that will enable good projects to be built more quickly in this country without cutting corners from an environmental perspective and while ensuring appropriate and thoughtful engagement with Indigenous peoples. Our economic plan is working. In just the last 3 years, more than $40 billion has been invested in over 100 clean growth projects across this country. Mais il est clair que nous devons faire plus pour pouvoir avancer au rythme exigé par le changement climatique et la transition énergétique mondiale. This is something that the Ministerial Working Group has worked hard on. It is also something that key departments, very much including mine, have been focused on over past months. Today, as Minister O'Regan underlined, we are announcing a regulatory and permitting action plan that is focused on ensuring that we can and we will move at the pace that the energy transition requires. The plan looks to drive initiatives in 5 major categories: advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, reducing duplication with provinces and territories, increasing impact assessment and permitting efficiency for clean growth projects, improving regulatory efficiency north of 60, and clean growth leadership in federal life cycle regulators. There are many initiatives that are contained in the action plan, and Seamus underlined a number of these. I would just reinforce what he noted by just noting a few that I think are key. In the Indigenous economic reconciliation area, certainly in the Indigenous loan guarantee that was announced in the recent budget, but also the establishment of a Crown Consultation Coordination Office. Removing duplication with provinces and territories, that certainly will be facilitated through the amendments to the Impact Assessment Act, but also through enhanced coordination around provisions like substitution. And certainly new ways of working like the regional energy and resource tables that my department has been putting in place with virtually every province and territory in this country. Increasing efficiency through the establishment of the new Clean Growth Office in the Privy Council Office, a new federal permitting coordinator, targets of 5 years or less for assessment and permitting of federally assessed projects and 2 years or less for non-federally designated projects, establishing a project dashboard to track the progress of major projects, and in the area of nuclear, a 3-year commitment for nuclear reviews. Les mesures décrites dans le plan d'action permettront au Canada d'améliorer considérablement l'efficacité des processus de réglementation et d'autorisation, des processus qui font déjà l'envie de bon nombre de nos pays partenaires. Cette réforme est essentielle pour que le Canada puisse saisir les opportunités économiques liées à la transition vers un avenir à faible émission de carbone. Mr. Poilievre's environmental plan is to simply let the planet burn and to abandon our youth to live in a future that is very, very challenging indeed. For someone who left the business community to enter politics because of climate change, I would say personally that his approach to this issue is honestly pathetic. And Mr. Poilievre's economic plan is no better. His plan for the future is simply to pump more oil and gas into a global market that eventually all thoughtful observers, including the International Energy Agency, indicate will peak and begin to decline within the next few years. Le plan d'action que nous publions aujourd'hui permettra au Canada d'aller de l'avant et de s'attaquer pleinement à la crise climatique, et de le faire d'une manière qui nous permettra de saisir les opportunités majeures qui s'offrent à nous. Seizing these opportunities in a thoughtful and strategic way will create good jobs and economic prosperity in the emerging low-carbon economy of the future. For Canadians now and into the future, all across this country, this is an important step forward. Thank you very much.
The steps you're announcing today, can you guys put them in real terms for me? Can you give me an example of a project and how it's going to get approved quicker just because there's targets and a dashboard?
First of all, anytime that you can give investors more certainty or more, any sense of stability, the better. So, this is something that I saw and we implemented when I was Veterans Affairs Minister. Appears unrelated, but here you also have a process where people get tremendously anxious when they don't know exactly where they are. It sounds trite, but really the idea at the time was what we saw happening with Domino's Pizza. That app had just come out. You could see where the toppings were put on, when it went into the oven. You could at least see where it was and, know that your pizza was going to arrive at a certain time. Imagine billions of dollars on the line and, people investing that money in, you name it, whether it be mining, particularly at a time when we need critical minerals, whether it's nuclear, whether it's the capacity to build any sort of big project that we need to get done to lower emissions and to increase the competitiveness and prosperity of the country. They just want to know where it is within the system. That is something that we have not accurately been able to provide them, but it is something that it is an asset in and of itself. If you can provide that certainty and stability, that is a draw, right? Just 2 nights ago, actually, Congress passed a sweeping nuclear legislation. I think only 2 senators voted against it. Now, we all know how bipartisanship works right now in the United States. They get it too, right? This is a very, very competitive space. And the point of this bill, the advance bill, was to cut back on red tape, to provide certainty to investors. And I got to be very clear what I mean by red tape. I really am talking about unnecessary duplication. I'm not talking about the regulations that we rely upon in order to be able to look after the environment. Jonathan and I, it's been a pleasure working with Jonathan again because we worked closely together when I was at NRCan and he was in Environment. We found all sorts of ways in which we could just cut back on stuff and maintain or increase, in many cases, the environmental integrity, but cutting back the amount of time. There's a lot of duplication that does come about. And there's when you are, I think it's fair to say, when you're an activist government that is focused on on climate change and is focused on a growth agenda, sometimes you end up with duplicative regulations. The job was seek them out where we can find them and get rid of them. And that in and of itself, I think, will draw more investment and increase our capacity to build these things and to get them done.
So I agree with everything Seamus said, but I would just maybe add to that. I think if you think about 2 different areas that I would highlight, one is the creation of the Clean Growth Office, the establishment of target timelines, the establishment of a permitting dashboard and a major projects dashboard actually provides transparency in terms of where these things are at in the process. There are often multiple departments involved in assessing a project. One that may be the Impact Assessment Agency, but DFO has the Fisheries Act authorizations, Environment Canada has the Metal Mines Effluent regulations, et cetera. What this does is provide a focus, and it provides to all of us and to all of our officials timelines within which they expect these things to be done. And targets and timelines drive performance. Anybody in the business community will tell you that. The second is we don't want to do things twice with the provinces and territories. And so looking at ways in which we can optimize the work that needs to be done, but do it once and ideally have one organization do it. And so the provision around substitution, I think, and those kinds of things are things that we're going to be exploring with all of the provinces and territories. The only province we've done that with to date is British Columbia. And the most recent project that went through the Impact Assessment Act was the Cedar LNG project. It went entirely through from end to end in 3 years. So.
Let me add to that, because it's kind of timely, David, and then I'll get to you. But I just wanted to get this in because we were able to get the Sustainable Jobs C50 through, but we weren't able to get C49 through. I'm a little bitter about that. That's because, to get back to duplication and, government acting sensibly, this basically says, look, offshore wind, which is now, booming, and with billions potentially coming into the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, the regulatory regime that should look after that should be the regulatory regime that has basically birthed and sustained the offshore oil industry, which is the Atlantic Accord, which is what the province wants, which has, done an exemplary job about creating a new industry. And so when we talked about extending the Atlantic Accord to include offshore wind, we just thought this was basically, who would be against this? I mean, the Atlantic Accord was authored by progressive conservative governments federally and provincially. Well, lo and behold, what dawned on me is this isn't just a case of, they don't want us to subsidize renewables. They are actually against them. That's the only thing I can figure out. Otherwise, we got to come up with a whole new regulatory regime for offshore wind in Newfoundland and Labrador. Like, it's wild to me. But anyway, we will get it through. And that is another excellent example of where we don't need duplication. We will work with the province. In fact, no part of the Atlantic Accord legislation, nothing about it, not one period, not one comma can be changed unless the province goes along with it as well. This maintains their agency, their autonomy, and their jurisdiction. Like, this is a sweet piece of legislation that has been very good to my province for decades. So anyway, we will get that passed.
Can I wonder, Minister Wilkinson, and I'm going to come back to you with
Sure.
a question. If I can indulge you, since my colleagues here too, I have 3 questions about electric vehicles.
Okay.
The first one is on subsidies. We're going to spend about $500 million a year to subsidize consumers' purchases of new EVs. We've done some work in this for some features we're doing that show high-income households are usually the recipients of these subsidies. Your government has said about the Canada Child Benefit, we're not sending checks to millionaires, but you're sending checks to millionaires to help them buy electric vehicles. Is it suitable then to use that $500 million? Is it progressive? Is it fit in with that notion you shouldn't be sending checks to millionaires to continue to send checks to millionaires to subsidize purchase of their new electric vehicles?
So I would say it is appropriate in this particular context, and it's appropriate because when you have new technology that needs to be adopted, you actually need early adopters to start. That's true with every technology. I spent a long time in the tech business, so it's something I understand pretty well. Early adopters typically are people who are very tech savvy, are interested in the newest thing, and they often are people in slightly higher income areas. But you need to actually have them catalyze a market to be able to actually drive down the cost such that you don't need the subsidies over the long term. Eventually, we will not be subsidizing electric vehicles because they will be producing enough of these things, they will have cost reduced them to the point where they are fully competitive with internal combustion engines. I would also say that you typically start with higher end models, and so Tesla, for example. But what you are starting to see now, as the market has been catalyzed, is lower end vehicles actually coming onto the market that are more affordable for the average person. Yeah.
And that's a great segue for the second part of this question. Is Quebec is phasing out their subsidies. They don't see the environmental bang for the buck. So then, what are the conditions then? You mentioned at some point there's enough cars out there we don't need to subsidize. Are we near that point to eliminate the federal subsidy? A long way? Can you talk about envisioning ending those subsidies?
I don't think we're there, but I don't think we're probably that far away. What we are seeing is more and more models being brought on by different auto manufacturers. It's not just Tesla anymore. And as you do that, and as you see the volumes go up, it's a scale game in auto manufacturing, right? I mean, if you make one, it's a $10 million car. If you make a million, it's a $10,000 car. So we need to actually see further deployment, but my expectation is that over the next number of years, we won't be needing to subsidize, or perhaps we won't be needing to subsidize fully across the board. There are provinces that actually provide different levels of subsidy based on income as well.
Now, here's the fun one. Thank you for the indulgence. The third and last one. So in mapping these, we have found what I'll call EV deserts. We take a look at your riding. North Vancouver, there's 24 EVs for every 1,000 people. Vancouver Quadra, 46. That's high, nationally speaking. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador, EV deserts. EV adoption rates, even in big cities like Edmonton, 3 or 4 per 1,000.
Yep.
I know the barriers to EV adoption, cost, range anxiety, but one of the other things experts have talked to me about is what they call petromasculinity. It's the culture. I just want to hear that engine. So you're a child of Saskatchewan, and there you are in an EV desert. Is there something in the culture in some parts of the country? How do we get people to think about it who love to hear the sound of that engine? Or for other reasons, there's, I'm embarrassed to buy an EV. You know what I'm saying? Like some parts of the country, there's a culture thing. Not in Vancouver, I know, but there is in Saskatchewan and there is in Newfoundland and Labrador. So maybe both of you on that topic.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I would say I think there are other barriers first and foremost than just wanting to listen to the engine. I would expect that if you actually mapped infrastructure onto your EV deserts, you would find that the infrastructure, the fueling infrastructure, is not there. In BC, you can go to almost any small town and you will find significant numbers of EV chargers. And that's because the government of British Columbia has partnered with the government of Canada, and we're both spending money to actually help build out the infrastructure. We are releasing, or have we released, Carolyn, the map yet? Not yet. Okay. We will be releasing a map. Okay, we will be releasing a map that actually shows the infrastructure across the country. And one of the things that I think it will be helpful in informing is where we actually need to be doing more in directing some of the government's funds. There are some areas where we don't need to invest in infrastructure anymore. There's actually enough cars on the road that there's a business to be made. But I would say I think that's the biggest issue. I would say in some provinces, I am from Saskatchewan. I used to work for a distinguished premier of Saskatchewan, but Saskatchewan's the only province in Canada that actually puts a dedicated tax on electric vehicles, which is odd. I would say, though, that perhaps there is some sort of cultural attachment a little bit to an internal combustion engine or a diesel engine. But I think part of that also relates to the models that have been available to date. Those have been mainly urban cars. I don't know if you've driven a Lightning, a Ford Lightning, which is the pickup truck that's electric. It's a pretty cool car. And I think that as you see more of those models coming on, I think maybe you'll start to see some of those things moving away.
Yeah, I'm going to defend my city. I think my very sophisticated city, St. John's. I mean, you've got EVs, you've got F-150s, and absolutely. I think Jonathan's right. I mean, I have people who've talked to me about EVs. I have friends of mine who talk about EVs. But if you live in St. John's and you want to go anywhere, really, there's just the anxiety of, will I be able to reach Bay Roberts? Will I be able to reach Clarenville? It's not just the big trips maybe to Corner Brook or whatever, but just around the area. Go to Argentia, go to Placentia. So once the infrastructure builds up and once the price point comes down, money talks, right? I mean, ultimately, and the fact of the matter is, they are amazing to drive. So, if there's any sort of cultural issue, look, that's always going to exist. And I'm sure, right up until the last minute, there were people who were, driving horse and buggies because they weren't given into this new stuff. And we'll see that change. This change is going to take time, and people love their trucks. People love their trucks, and they should love them. They are fun, too. We have to do our part to make sure that we draw people to EVs for all the right reasons. It's not just a matter of, being virtuous. It's a matter of they're fun to drive. And we're going to make sure that they are easy to drive and cheap. You line that up, and that's the direction we're heading, we'll be okay. Yeah.
All right, I just have some questions for you about the salmon announcement from yesterday. Sure. So just following the announcement, there was some rather critical and negative reception, not just from the industry. We had a coalition of First Nations groups where these farms are taking place. They called it sort of a direct response to the press conference, irresponsible, unrealistic, unachievable, saying that the 5-year transition is sort of, that would be akin to shutting down the industry. And I guess the phrase was sort of saying that this is sort of a political play rather than based on science or reconciliation to benefit Vancouver. I think the phrase was, BC is not Vancouver. It seemed like very directed shots at Vancouver riding. So I just want to ask you, if the industry is against this, there's members of your caucus who seem very upset about this, and the First Nations do not seem like this is helpful to them. Who does this benefit, and what was this decision based on?
So let me take that in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, it is based on science. I was the fisheries minister for 2 years. I'm very, very deeply aware of the scientific debate that rages about the impacts of aquaculture, open net pens on wild Pacific salmon. The wild Pacific salmon stocks are crashing, right? When I was fisheries minister, I had to close the Fraser runs for all sorts of fishing, including for a period of time food and ceremonial for Indigenous communities, because the stocks were in such bad shape. And so if we are going to look to try to save wild Pacific salmon, we have to look to try to address all of the issues that are affecting or potentially affecting them. And certainly that is climate change. The rivers get too warm now when the salmon are running. It is habitat destruction. In the past, it had been overfishing. But there is also an enormous scientific debate about the impacts of salmon farms. And while there are some on the record from a scientific perspective, I know the salmon farmers believe this, that say that there is no reason to be concerned about this. I will tell you virtually every scientist in academia, in the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and a range of others say this is a real problem, and it is causing some of the declines that we are seeing. In the midst of that debate, it behooves us to act with the precautionary principle. I'm not interested in being a minister that oversaw the extirpation of wild Pacific salmon. It behooves us to act with precaution, and that is what the announcement was yesterday. I would also say that First Nation voices are not unanimous. I was standing with Chief Bob Chamberlain. He represents 120 First Nations across British Columbia that have demanded the closure of open net pens. I recognize that Dallas, who would have held the press conference, there are a number of communities that actually have open net farms that create jobs and economic opportunity for people who live there. We, of course, have to be concerned about that. We have to work with those communities on economic transition. I am quite excited about the ability to work on transitions to closed containment in water or on land. I recognize the industry will say that it is far enough away that that's a challenge in 5 years. I come from the clean tech industry. When you set a goal, you can achieve that goal. And I have invited the industry to work with us on the closed containment thing. But I will tell you, the auto manufacturers will tell you, and would have told you 5 years ago, that we were too ambitious on EVs, and we are hitting the targets that we need to hit. The oil and gas industry would say, well, carbon capture is going to take longer, and therefore we can't actually do the things that we need to do. At the end of the day, we have to stop giving ourselves excuses to destroy the environment. That's why we have climate change. That's why we have biodiversity loss in this country. That's why we have plastics in the waters that we drink. At the end of the day, we need to set targets, and then we need to work towards them in good faith. And I am certainly willing, and certainly the Minister of DFO is willing to work with them on the closed containment thing. But we have to act with precaution.
And just as a follow-up, I think that the draft transition plan will be, I think, end of July, if I'm remembering. Why were these sort of things not ready for that announcement? I know there's the concerns about the grid, and then I guess all the stuff you said about the transition. Should that have not been sort of done in tandem, or is this an issue of maybe Robert Fife screwed you over a little bit there with the lead?
No. With due respect to Bob Fife, no. So the issue was that the licenses had to be renewed by the end of June. And so it was important for us to make a decision, to be able to communicate that decision before those licenses expired. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been developing a draft plan. It will be ready about a month from now. It will be a draft. And the purpose of the plan is actually consultation with the communities, with First Nations, and with other stakeholders in British Columbia, with a focus on actually developing what is actually required in terms of funding from the federal government for economic transition, for investments in technology that will inform a budgetary request in 2025. That will inform a request to the 2025 budget. Yeah.
I have two real quick ones, if that's okay. On this report, it teases a upcoming cabinet directive on clean growth projects. Is there going to be anything new in that, or is that just going to reiterate what's being announced today?
But the action plan is the substance of it. One thing, if I could take the opportunity, just one thing, we really wanted Ministers Haidu and Adesangari to be here as well, but anyway, conflicting appointments and stuff, but the Indigenous element here is really, really important to me. They are not a roadblock or an impediment to development. They are utterly necessary to the future of energy in this country. And what we look for are substantive ways, and we will continue to look for substantive ways to make sure that the consultations that they are involved in are meaningful and tangible. I've done a lot of work in this area well before my time as Minister of Indigenous Services, and the big issue is capacity. And we are particularly guilty of overextending them because we've been doing the right things, which is your community, your First Nation should be in charge of housing. You should develop housing. You should develop new medical facilities. You should develop where the roads should go. You should do the water. You should do their ability to handle all that. It is usually down to a few people, in my experience, generally women, who are just they got a lot going on. So it's a good thing that we're asking them to be in charge of these decisions. It is good that we are asking that they be meaningfully consulted before any of this happens, but there are capacity issues, and we are going to work with them to address those capacity issues. And then there are issues of just finances, making sure that they can come to the table with a source of revenue that allows them to participate in an equitable fashion. And we're working on that now in a meaningful way as well. That is just a tremendously important part of this report. Yes.
And last question for Mr. Wilkinson. You brought up Saskatchewan. I'm just curious, this is totally off topic, but what the heck is going on with Saskatchewan? It's been 4 months since they broke federal law, didn't remit the carbon tax. Are we ever going to see anything come of that? Are you just going to let that one slide? Or?
Oh, we're definitely not going to let that one slide. I mean, provincial premiers can't decide selectively which laws they're going to abide by and which laws they're going to break. That is a recipe for anarchy, and I'm not sure how Premier Moe can ask his own citizens to abide by laws that are passed by the provincial legislature if he himself is not willing to actually abide by the rules of the land. But what I would say is, and I think the Prime Minister has said this on a number of occasions, the Canada Revenue Agency is the appropriate tool. When you don't pay your taxes, the Canada Revenue Agency will come and talk to you about that and find a way to remedy that situation. Those conversations certainly need to go on with the province of Saskatchewan, and I expect that you will hear something about that in the coming weeks and months.
Still exclusively in the CRA's court. We're just waiting for
We are leaving it to the good graces of the CRA, and I would say that the CRA is typically pretty effective at collecting taxes.
Thank you all. Thanks.